I'm Karen Piker, and together with me is Arsen Ostrovsky. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and about your efforts to expose the truth about what's really going on in Israel.
I'm a human rights attorney, originally from Australia, but now live in Tel Aviv. I'm a father with 2 children, and that's probably the most important thing. We're fighting this legal battle, but I'm also a father. I'm also a parent. I'm also trying to cope with children in wartime, asking questions, why are they firing rockets at us? So it's a very complicated, very difficult life. And being here today in Sderot is on this anniversary is just so overwhelming, because just when you think you've seen it all, you've heard it all, you hear something else. Stories of, as we see here with a police station, was stories of incredible heroism, but also incredible sadness, incredible bravery, and incredible carnage. Things that you see and that we will never unsee. I stood in Kibbutz Be'eri in the days after the war started, and it's a valley of death. There are things that stay with you forever, and this is difficult times, but we need to fight.
As a lawyer myself, I am very familiar of all of these causes that we've seen now in the video, from the river to the sea, etc.
Yeah.
What is the biggest misconception about Israel in regards of international law that you are dealing with in your day-to-day work?
Look, it's an important question, and we have to recognize that we are fighting multiple wars on different battlefronts. It's not only our heroic soldiers fighting in Gaza and our Lebanon, but we're also fighting online. We're fighting in the diplomatic arena. We're fighting in the political arena, but we're also fighting the legal arena, which is so crucial, because so much of the legal discourse, and I would call it a pervasive discourse, a perversion of the law, it reverberates around the world. When Israel is portrayed as a pariah, as a war criminal, as committing genocide, ethnic cleansing, starving children, all these incredibly anti-Semitic libels, mistruths, malicious distortions, that reverberates, because then you have countries saying, well, maybe we should have arms embargoes, or you have international courts saying that Israel, or accusing Israel guilty of genocide. You have marches calling for intifada on the streets of North America and Europe. So the discourse is very pervasive. It's a very, when the international law becomes weaponized against us, it politicizes and undermines the entire legal order. And we have to be very clear that, contrary to the lies and misconceptions that Israel is some kind of pariah, we are not. We're far from it. That is a lie. That is a blood libel of the highest order. Israel's gone above and beyond to levels not seen in the history of modern warfare to not only minimize civilian casualties, but abide by the principles of international law, extent and lengths to which no army has ever gone to. And that's something I think we need to recognize, not only calling out the lies and mistruths, but reiterating that the extent to which Israel goes to abide by the principles of international humanitarian law.
One example you're probably referring to is the fact that Israel notifies before attacking specific places to avoid civilian casualties. What is the biggest lie that you hear about Israel, except for we're all hearing about the fact that the misconception that Israel is committing genocide without an intent to commit genocide, which is the ground base for committing genocide, right? So what advice would you give a freshman student in Harvard that is now listening to a twist of history and a twist of the truth? What do you advise him to do on campus?
Look, that's 2 questions, and they're 2 very different, very complicated questions. With respect to the first part, about which part of the law is most often, maligned and misused against us. And you spoke about, for example, the charge of genocide, one of the biggest, grossest anti-Semitic libels we've seen in modern history. And most often, it's couched in the supposed civilian casualty figures. They say that we're guilty of committing genocide by virtue of 40,000 number of civilian deaths, which they point to. Number one is those numbers are taken from the so-called Gaza Health Ministry, which is no more than a propaganda arm of Hamas. Then you have to look at the law and look at the figures and look at the circumstances. What actually is happening is that it is Hamas, and now, by the way, Hezbollah, exactly the same situation, are guilty of committing a double war crime of hiding behind civilians in Gaza, and Hezbollah doing exactly the same thing in Lebanon.
And using them as human shields
whilst indiscriminately firing at Israel. And as you said, Israel's gone above and beyond to try and minimize civilian casualties. We care more about the Palestinians and the innocent Lebanese than Hezbollah or Hamas do. We give leaflets, we warn in advance, we provide evacuation paths. We essentially telegraph what we're going to do, where we're going to do it, and how we're going to do it to the risk to our own soldiers in order to minimize casualties. That is the extent to which we go, that no other army, not the United States, not Great Britain, no major army in Europe ever do. So that's, I think, important to recognize.
So a quick tip to a freshman student who is fighting anti-Semitism on campus and the lies.
Yeah. I think, first of all, it's not easy. And we need to recognize that, we're talking about all these multiple battlefronts, and the campus battlefront is something else as well. We have filed a lawsuit, for example, against the group SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, accusing them of being the campus arm of Hamas. So we know it is difficult being Jewish and it's difficult being Zionist as well on campus. But the students need to know that we stand with them as well. They need to be proud Jews, proud Zionists, need to learn the facts, need to learn the information. They need to know that we stand with them as well. They are not alone, that they have resources and that they're not mere victims, that they have legal options as well in order to hold the administrators, in order to hold the universities, in order to hold these groups that are pushing and fomenting this violent hatred. But they ultimately, we want them to know that you are not alone, that you have support.
Do you support them legally as well?
Absolutely. Like I said, one of the main lawsuits we're involved with partners in the US is we filed against SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. They are the number one group that is not only fomenting the encampments, the violence, the hatred we see on campus, but they're also essentially acting as a propaganda arm of Hamas. On October 7th, Hamas issued a call to action. The very next day, SJP, for example, distributed a manifesto, a toolkit. They're acting as their arm on campus. So absolutely, we're working with different lawyers across the United States, with different partners, to help students to ensure that their rights are being upheld and used in order to not only support them, but to hold the universities accountable as well, and all those that are actually guilty of not only committing these systematic acts of anti-Semitism, but supporting, aiding, abetting, and funding them as well.
Now we're hearing a lot about the UN and all of its efforts to do everything in their power, but condemning Iran, for example, for firing ballistic rockets in the largest ballistic attack in history. What is your take on that?
We normally say there are two certainties in life, death and taxes, and we can add a third, that Israel will always be guilty before the United Nations. The UN, it was created in the wake of the Holocaust, and today it has become the single greatest purveyor of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, and now even pogrom denial, when we have agencies like UNRWA, which literally employ and pay staff to be members of Hamas, to participate in these vile massacres and abduction of our people, when agencies like UN Women, which are meant to support women's rights, have been silent, unconscionably silent for the last 12 months, as our girls and our women have been raped, tortured, and abducted. When the UN Human Rights Council condemns Israel almost more times than the entire world put together, and when they still to this day, the United Nations has not condemned Hamas or Hezbollah.
Thank you very much for this. Very important takeaways for everyone's listening. And good luck with fighting the good fight.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.